Okay, so first things first, I don't really like the term must pull because it implies that this game has content that you need certain characters for, which just really isn't the case. However, if there was content that you needed to meet DPS checks for that were different from or harder than Spiral Abyss, Nahida would absolutely be the closest thing to a must pull at the moment. She's going to be insanely strong, and I want to talk to you about why you may not want to skip her if you're building teams that deal with Dendro. My name is Braxophone, and let's talk about the Dendro Archon. Previously, Kazuha was the closest character I said there was to a must pull, and the reason for that is pretty simple. He's easier to play than Sucrose and provides 5-star value. Sucrose is an amazing character, but many players would argue that Kazuha is more used on their account than Sucrose if they have them. With Sucrose being one of the strongest characters in the entire game due to debuffing enemies and grouping, it would make sense that someone similar with access to quicker rotations and elemental damage bonus would be a character that you'd want to pull for. At this point in Genshin Impact, Kazuha is still an amazing unit that's worth pulling for, and as I said before, close to a must pull, if must pull was a real concept in this game. And at this point, as of all the pre-release info that we do have, Nahida's pull value has the potential to be up there with Kazuha's. Most of the Archon characters in Genshin are pretty dang strong. Raiden brings positive value to many different teams, including some Dendro ones. Venti will always be good as long as Viridescent Venerer is good, and against enemies that can be moved, he's an amazing pick. Zhongli may be a damage loss in some top teams, but it's undeniable that his shield makes the game much easier for many players. Nahida is not looking to be an exception. Having access to continuous off-field Dendro damage and synergy with different Dendro reacting elements, she seems to be a solid all-around support. Now the big question is Nahida really that strong, or is it a lack of Dendro roster that makes her look a lot better? Since the beginning of Genshin, the roster has been ever expanding to include many different character weapon archetypes. With the introduction of Sumeru and Dendro, Hoyoverse needed to add a few units to start catching up with the other elements. But the problem is, if they only add Dendro units until Dendro is all caught up, the game might honestly get stale. With Dendro main character included, there was 3 Dendro units at the start of 3.0, with the other 2 being Kale and Toknari. Naturally, this leads to a lack of variety and options for Dendro teams. But at the same time, many players want to play Dendro teams, which means that the limited Dendro units are used up. In terms of usability, it's been generally decided that Dendro main character is the best Dendro support for off-field Dendro application, but unfortunately, you only have one of those. Kale can be useful in quicken teams with short rotations and field time, and Toknari is a decent Dendro DPS, but outside of that, those are all the Dendro utilities. Some players argue that Dendro main character is actually good. Others think that Lumine and Aether are only good because they're basically the only off-field Dendro option due to Kale's special internal cooldown that prevents her from applying Dendro that frequently. On top of that, her AoE is just kind of small. Regardless of your stance on this, it's undeniable that Dendro doesn't have a lot of flexibility right now, and all it would take to put Dendro in a much better position is to add more Dendro units to the game. If there was a better Dendro support than the options that we have, some Dendro teams might even get seen as competitive with current meta team options. Now I say might because this is a bold claim. Obviously there are very strong meta team options right now, and generally speaking, international is pretty hard to beat, but at the very least, we know that we would have a lot more Dendro options. Teams like Aggravate, Bloom, Hyperbloom, and Burgeon are all just lacking one really solid Dendro support. It also feels like Hoyoverse is sort of taking a direction towards characters that will have abilities that last longer or need more field time in order to push a different sort of playstyle with very long rotations. Now this is where Nahida comes in. Being one of 4 Dendro units on the roster at the time of her release, we can expect her to do something that the others don't, and because she's an Archon, it's not hard to imagine that she will perform well in at least one area. Based on the live stream, it looks like that area is going to be Dendro Application. It's hard to say how much damage she'll deal without the help of leaks, but at the least we know she marks enemies and continuously applies Dendro even while off the field. This mark also lasts for a very long time, meaning that she's not a character you'll have to swap to frequently to keep reapplying the element with, meaning characters that do take up long field time, like Cyno for example, will benefit from her Dendro application. Though Aggravate, Spread, Quicken teams have not really had that much issue with Dendro uptime recently, teams like Burgeon, Hyperbloom, and just regular Bloom teams have struggled with that just due to the Dendro aura often getting wiped off the enemy. For an Aggravate team, you're not seeing much loss of uptime with someone like Dendro MC, but for any bloom-based reaction teams, you absolutely need more Dendro. Having a character that can be the premier Dendro applier with their elemental skill alone is enough to make them strong, but to add a useful burst that also will buff Dendro Application in one way or another makes them even better. Nahida will not only be the 4th Dendro character, opening up more ways to use Dendro, but she'll also be solid in the new playstyles she provides. Just as an example of how Nahida can be incredibly useful, if you think about Nilou Bloom teams, you'll see double Dendro, double Hydro teams everywhere. The main reason for that is that most of the time, Dendro gets wiped out when a bloom is made, unless that Dendro is underneath another elemental aura. To counter that, you'll need to continuously apply Dendro via Kale and Dendro MC burst. But what ends up happening is that you run out of burst at some point and have some downtime. It also means that you can't choose who's triggering the blooms. With the Dendro Archon though, that won't be an issue, because she marks enemies for such a long time. With her skill reapplying Dendro on enemies consistently, that downtime looks to be a lot less, and you won't need to run 2 Dendro units. This essentially fixes Nilou's team RNG by allowing you to run 3 Hydro units and use Nahida to trigger the blooms. With her consistently triggering over a long period of time, she has the potential to have controlled bloom damage where you build her with Elemental Mastery. Not only are you alleviating the issue Nilou teams have of RNG, but you're also adding consistent Dendro application. And this get applied to other teams as well. Dendro uptime will be incredibly consistent, leading to so many new teams being available to being played. Nahida as a whole seems to be a huge fix to a lot of the bottlenecks that Dendro teams have seen so far, and due to Hoyoverse's stance on not power creeping units intentionally, it's likely there won't be many opportunities for Dendro supports to power creep Nahida. Nahida has 2 reasons to be better than Dendro MC and Kale. First off, she's an Archon, and traditionally, the Archons in Genshin are good, but second, she's a 5-star unit that the company is trying to sell, so it makes sense that she'd be better at supporting than Kale and Traveler for a lot of instances. So in Nahida's case, the power creep is fine. It's pretty clear that Hoyoverse is trying to do away with overpowered Animo characters, so having Dendro Application with an insane range will massively help with content when you're not going to have access to grouping utilities. That's something that only Nahida can bring to the table right now. Essentially what I'm saying is that Nahida is likely going to be a future-proofed pickup, unless Dendro as a whole goes under. So the answer to earlier's question? Well, it's a little bit of both. But either way, I can guarantee you that Nahida is an amazing pull for your account meta-wise. Maybe not a must pull, but there's no doubt that Nahida will be an absolutely insane unit, and while you should definitely wait and try her out yourself, it's worth considering picking her up on your journey. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to leave a like down below, leave a comment on if you're going to be getting Nahida, and consider subscribing to the channel. I'd love to hit 150k before the end of the year. That would be amazing. And thanks for all the support. Come check out my Twitch later. I'll be live. And until then, I'll catch you next time.